Hello, everybody, and very, very welcome to this session on Africa Design for Global Sustainable Development. It's an area quite new to the Design Society. We started last summer in Delft, where we conducted a workshop, and yesterday we did one here in this particular space. It's an honor to chair this session, and we are all curious to listen to you, and also for our listeners to please use the chat while listening to the presentations. I will present them soon. The idea is that the recorded presentations will be run in a row with no time in between. So you have to write down your questions to remember and to get what you need to ask to. We have today 4 papers. The first one is from University of Michigan. And the presenter will be Anabel Sicko, and she had done this work together with Sotirios-Aris Mitropoulos. You should help me, Panos. I can't breathe.
Practice your
and Stefanos Frilingos, and Ngozi, Aroh, and Panos Papalambros from University of Michigan. And Anabel has a bachelor in environmental engineering and are now working at Optimal Design Laboratory at University of Michigan. After this presentation, we come to paper number 2, which the title is PET Plastic in Food and Beverage Packaging Design, a review of legislation, literature, and industry reporting comparing European and South African industrial practice. And the presenter to this paper will be Minette Maritz and her co-workers from Cape Pennsylvania University of Technology, in South Africa. Her co-workers are Vikki, Eriksson, and Veronica Barnes. And Minette is an industrial designer from Cape Town, South Africa, and are combined working with the studies and the research work in the department, and working in companies full time as a plastic packaging designer in this field. The third paper, there I must start to say that I'm very happy to announce and congratulate the authors to this paper, because it's one of the reviewers' favorite within the best 10% rated by the reviewer score. So very much congratulations to you, Georgia, and your team. The title of this paper is Evaluating the Potential for Low Energy Emitters to Facilitate Solar-Powered Drip Irrigation in Sub-Saharan Africa. Georgia van der Zande is a PhD candidate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and she's a member of the Global Engineering Research Lab of focuses on drip irrigation technologies in emerging markets. Her co-workers is Susan Amrose and Amos Winter. The last paper in our session today is the title Review of Design Research for Sustainable Development in Africa, a Design Science Perspective. And here, as I said before, Thomas Wilson Barlow will run the presentation, or is recorded on the presentation. And he's a master's student from the University of Michigan in mechanical engineering. Today, to respond difficult question on this paper, Panos Papalambros is here, and the third co-worker is Melissa T. Green on this paper. So these are the 4 papers that we're going to listen to today. And maybe I should ask Robert if there's anything that I have forgot to tell about now.
Fine, I will play the presentations now.
No. Thank you. Yeah. Well, one more thing. Maybe I didn't. It's very. Crazy. I'm Margareta Norell Bergendahl, and I'm a professor emeritus from KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. I should have said that first, of course. Welcome to all. Thank you. So now we mute.
Hello, my name is Anabel Sicko, and I'm an undergraduate research assistant at the University of Michigan in the US. I have been working on the Optimal Design Laboratory's Africa Design Project. Today, I will be summarizing the findings from a review of research and design project funding for sustainable development in Africa. The availability of funding is an important component when in the design process. As you may know, a design problem cannot be addressed without the financial means to find a solution. Governments, non-governmental organizations, and multinational organizations try to fill in the investment gaps which arise from the factors pictured here. Given the high rate of population growth in Africa, it is important to consider the increased resource use on the continent over the coming decades. Africa will begin to play an even larger role in the question of sustainability and resource availability. Our search was split into these three categories: identified needs for funding, sources of funding, and potential uses for funds. When the exact amount of design-focused funding was unavailable, we decided to make no assumptions to try and estimate it. In the paper, we often imply that large-scale projects have a design spending component, even if said component cannot be properly identified. Here is a list of IGOs, or intergovernmental organizations, that we identified as key providers of funding for design projects. The EU is mostly focused in job creation and startup funding. It also provides most money for projects. The AFDB, or the African Development Bank, disperses funding to a few different areas: sanitation, electricity, job creation, and urban development. USAID oversees an annual Development Innovation Ventures program through which it provides funding for projects which offer innovative solutions to philanthropic world issues. As an example, Burn Manufacturing Limited became the leading manufacturer and distributor of clean cook stoves in sub-Saharan Africa by using the $3 million it raised through the program. NGOs aim to develop skills within communities and long-lasting solutions to problems. As an example, the Global Innovation Fund offers funding to the 1 Acre Fund. The 1 Acre Fund is then responsible for carrying out and implementing the plan. Funding by non-governmental organizations involves the formation of partnerships with businesses, like through the Heineken Africa Foundation. These programs can include education and increased understanding of the need for better hygiene, for example, but ultimately can take a number of forms and provide funding from various types of sources. Though not an exhaustive list, here are some examples of NGOs which fund projects that focus on urban development in African countries. Arguably, not all of research and development spending goes into projects aimed at sustainable development, and that should be kept in mind when interpreting the data. In general, it is a sensible assumption that countries investing heavily in development would aim to do so in a sustainable way. We looked more into agriculture spending for reasons mentioned in the top of this slide. Note that this analysis does not take into account the capabilities of each nation specifically, for example, financial, cultural, or environmental, but it does provide a large overview of how the continental governments, in sum, are underinvesting in agriculture. While it appears that some high-quality innovative businesses can find access to these funds, one must wonder how many other efforts never reach this stage of fundraising due to restricted access to information concerning the application processes. This paper aimed to serve only as a review of some of the largest and most important funding mechanisms available. Some other limitations include that small-scale design projects' budgets are not often made public, while for large-scale projects, when their budgets do exist, distinctions between the money going into the design phase and the implementation process are not readily available.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me here today. I'm Minette from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in South Africa. Today I'm going to talk to you about PET packaging within the food and beverage industry. The key question that this article aimed to answer was why it is important to consider geographical location and user behavior when designing products and recycling systems. In a 2017 research paper by Hammer and Pivot, they argued that sustainable development cannot take place without recognizing that current development patterns need to change. Carrying on with the same systems can jeopardize the environmental structure concerning both the planet and economy. For holistic development to take place, it is essential for designers to learn from previous generations. The research approach used in the study was a systematic literature review. This approach was suitable as it details the decisions made by the researcher while collecting and sorting secondary data. The data was gathered from multiple peer-reviewed databases, industry reports, publications, and industry watchdogs. Since the 1950s, more than 42% of all plastic produced globally have been used for packaging. Currently, plastic packaging accounts for 1/3 of the total packaging industry. The design and manufacturing of plastic packaging must therefore be reviewed to propose design changes focused on immediate impact while longer-term solutions are implemented. The global plastic packaging market will be worth $998 billion by 2020, indicating a 3.5% growth per annum. In South Africa alone, the informal job creation within the plastic packaging industry was estimated at 52,300 in 2017. These statistics prove that the plastics industry plays an integral part in both the financial and social economy. Gestalt psychology was used in this research to understand how user behavior can be triggered through appropriate patterns and interventions. Gestalt principles shows the subconscious relationship between the consumer expectation and the designed product. It is based on the idea that consumers will react to certain products or shapes based on previous experiences. Currently, bioplastics are being researched as an alternative to synthetic plastics. Most current bioplastic packaging does not specify the biodegradability or compostability of the product. This may lead to uninformed consumers discarding packaging recklessly. These factors reinforce the importance of governments to apply strict labeling policies to ensure that consumers are educated and informed. Globally, PET water bottles offer convenience in a hot climate and access to water when no other safe source is available. When the entire ecosystem is understood, the potential of product design interventions, technologies, and new developments become apparent. Even with plastics being more recyclable than ever, one cannot assume that consumers will recycle them. Lack of consumer knowledge and appropriate waste management systems impacts this. The importance of creating sustainable recycling systems which are tailor-made for different countries becomes apparent in this slide. Within South Africa, the plastics recycling industry is based on economic principles. This is in contrast with Europe, where recycling is based on environmental legislation which is enforced by local government. South Africa relies on manual labor and waste picking, whereas in Europe, the entire system is automated. In 2017, 74% of all plastic materials that were recycled in South Africa originated from landfill and post-consumer sources. This slide divides the circular economy into 3 spheres: biosphere, human sphere, and technosphere. The human sphere is highlighted as being the most important aspect within the system, showing the importance of taking user behavior into account when designing. Recommendations for the future development of PET plastics in the food and beverage industry are as follows. Reconsider PET plastic production and design in a holistic manner. Consider all facets of the system when designing packaging. Utilize Gestalt principles to understand user behaviors. Combine expertise of different designers and exchange data. Study supporting alternative materials and create legislation that is enforced by the local governments. Develop opportunities for industry within local municipalities according to their resources. Create waste management systems which are designed to suit the needs of the user and the environment. These recommendations include all three user categories: be eco-friendly, financially viable, and socially appropriate, thus suggesting new lifecycle pathways for plastic packaging in the future. These concepts are explored in more detail in our paper. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Georgia Van de Zan. I'm a PhD candidate in the MIT Global Engineering and Research Lab. On behalf of my coworkers, I'll be presenting our work on evaluating the potential for low-energy drip emitters to facilitate solar-powered drip irrigation in sub-Saharan Africa. This work sought to answer the research question, what is the potential for novel low-energy drip emitters to act as an enabling technology for solar-powered drip irrigation among smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa? We focus on irrigation because it has been shown to bring smallholders out of poverty and increase food security in this region. We focus on drip irrigation to help sub-Saharan Africa intensify their agriculture sustainably. Drip is a water-efficient irrigation method that delivers water directly to the roots of crops through a pressurized pipe network. It can save 20 to 60% of water for a given amount of crop compared to conventional irrigation methods like sprinklers or flood irrigation. Unfortunately, drip hasn't been as widely adopted in sub-Saharan Africa as it has in other regions. One of the biggest barriers is the current cost of the pipe network, as well as the pump and power system needed to pressurize the network. A second barrier is the farmer maintenance required. Recently, GearLab has developed novel low-energy drip emitter designs that can help address the cost barrier. By lowering the activation of the emitters by 83%, we have shown that the capital cost of a solar-powered drip system can be up to 40% lower than if that system had used conventional emitters. These low-energy emitters have shown success in field trials in Jordan and Morocco, but we haven't fully understood their potential to act as an enabling technology in sub-Saharan Africa. To understand this research gap, we looked at the space through two lenses. First, an ethnographic lens through which we understood user-driven needs, and second, an engineering estimation lens through which we understood what could technically be feasible. Through the ethnographic lens, we took a three-phase qualitative and quantitative approach. In phase one, we interviewed key market stakeholders from private irrigation companies to microfinance institutions. In phase two, we interviewed 17 smallholders who had a mix of drip irrigation experience. And in phase three, we interviewed 8 smallholders who had all been beta testing a private company's drip kit for 4 or 5 months. We learned that drip can save farmers time and labor if they are trained well. This would help address the maintenance barrier to drip I mentioned earlier. But of course, this is a big if, because maintenance and operation issues can be exacerbated by poor reach of extension services in many countries. We also learned that sprinklers are more intuitive to farmers who have less irrigation experience. One area we are investigating further is if sprinklers could serve as an educational stepping stone to drip irrigation. When looking at the space through the engineering estimation lens, we built a model to predict key cost components so we could compare the capital cost of low-energy drip systems to impact sprinkler systems. I won't go through all the details in this presentation, but a list of our key assumptions are on the slide, and a longer explanation is in the conference paper. We used key parameters gleaned from stakeholder interviews and literature as inputs to the model. The key differences are highlighted in blue. They're the wetting factor, which takes the water efficiency of drip into account, the pressure head needed to use the equipment, and the irrigation equipment cost. We use the model to predict the price of systems using these two irrigation methods from a range of field sizes, from 0 to 0.5 hectares, and at a range of water depths, from 0 to 30 meters deep. We found that when farmers have deeper water sources, drip can be more cost-effective than sprinklers. This happens because the power needs are much lower for drip systems, so a smaller solar panel area is needed. Less water must be lifted from the ground and sent through the pipe network, which also runs at a lower pressure. Both of these efforts take less energy with low-energy drip than they do with impact sprinklers. What's more is that we know water depths around 20 meters are common in this region, so these results are promising. In summary, we assess the potential for novel low-energy drip emitters to act as an enabling technology for solar-powered drip irrigation among smallholders in sub-Saharan Africa. Through our engineering lens, we presented an estimation model showing that we could potentially overcome the cost barrier of drip for farmers who have water sources greater than 20 meters deep. And through our ethnographic lens, we learned that drip can save farmers time and effort if they are trained well. This doesn't always happen, so we want the technology we designed to be introduced with an effective training solution. We're continuing to work in this space and answer, how can we design a system that meets the price and performance needs of these farmers? We're also answering, are there other farmer user groups who could benefit from low energy drip technology? With that, I want to thank the rest of the Gear Lab team and our sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Thomas Barlow, and I will be going over the paper titled Review of Design Research for Sustainable Development in Africa, a Design Science Perspective. So the question that we were looking at was, what design research is being done in or about Africa on the sustainable development topics? And we were looking at this intersection between sustainable development, design research, and African nations and regions. And the goals were to find research opportunities that exist within the space, to better understand research priorities that already exist, and to discover potential collaborations that exist or could exist in this space. And we were being driven by the potential impact that using design and design tools has on furthering the sustainable development of these regions and countries within Africa. So the method used was a semi-systematic review. This was done because we were including papers from a large variety of disciplines. And the inclusion criteria is as seen below here on the slide. For sustainable development, we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. For design, we had a broad definition with the goal to include a wider research community. And for the Africa inclusion criteria, the paper was either written intended for use or application within a country or region within Africa. Looking at the results, one of the first major findings was a difference in research topics by region. So first, we grouped the papers by research topic defined by the Sustainable Development Goals. We then looked at the location of the primary author's affiliation, whether or not it was in Africa or outside of Africa. And as can be seen on the right, the prevalence of water-related papers by non-African researchers was different than the number of water-related articles by African-affiliated authors. And we felt that this was an important difference and showed a possible misalignment in research priorities that could be from potential, a variety of potential reasons, which will be looked at later. Some other findings were that there were differences within topics. So each general topic was then labeled into subtopics. So within the energy group, there were, for example, biogas, home, microgrid, etc. And there were differences between African and non-African within the subtopics. For example, as seen here for energy, biogas was more prevalent for African researchers, African affiliated researchers versus non-African affiliated was focused more on home use, such as cooking, energy related to cooking. And this was another interesting find, because we found that with more co-authors within a specific topic, there were also less differences in the subtopics. We felt like this was important finding that we could look into further. Also, we looked at differences between countries, as Africa's a widely diverse continent. We used the countries to differentiate and see some differences within the continent. Overall, we found misalignment between some African and non-African researchers with major differences in water and energy. We felt that improved collaboration appears to be a need for the research community, and that understanding funding may shed more light. We feel that these are an important starting point for further research in this area. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all. Just to make it clear, do you hear me now? Thank you. Thank you. So thank you all of you for very interesting presentations. I do like to have them in raw in a way, because then we can really find links between them that makes us even more knowledgeable and curious. We do have a first question, and I will ask you please to continue to give questions. It's from Georgia. We want to ask Anabel, from what you've seen, what stage of the design process is not getting enough funding? You can see the rest. So what do you say, Anabel?
I'm not sure that I have a clear answer from what our research concluded to that question. We more so know the areas of design, topics for design that were and were not getting different levels of funding, but Dr. Papalambros might have something to add there.
Right, thank you. Excuse me, Anabel. Yeah, so thanks, Anabel. You know, Anabel is still a junior, and this is her first major event, so she's very nervous about things. But Anabel, you did a great job in the video. So just jump in, okay? First of all, I want to make a general comment about both of those papers that we presented today, and also ask all the participants, including our co-speakers, to see them as sort of conversation starters. Essentially what happened after, a year ago at the, as Margareta said, in the creation of the Africa Design Initiative within the Design Society, we wanted to create a network of researchers, practitioners, and educators that deal with design in a sustainable development context. and we're focused on Africa as being probably the most challenging area in the world on future sort of impact on sustainability. So certainly speaking for myself, I didn't know much about the whole area, and asking around, I found that while there's a lot of work that's been, studies on Africa, very little was related to design per se. So we decided to try to first do a review of what has been published in the general literature, the scientific literature, as opposed to the popular literature, on research that you could sort of give a design science sort of title that is, that use scientific principles. And this was the motivation for the fourth paper that Thomas discussed, and he's really the primary author of all that work. So in that context, for the research side, the issue is that it was really hard to pinpoint what was directed towards design research. And so in many ways, if you read the paper, you realize that we use sort of the innovation, entrepreneurship, these types of words to link them with design because they had sort of a design content, but a lot of the funding would not say it's like design funding. It was more innovation, entrepreneurship. And actually this reflects how in the developed world, in Europe and the US, we've been sort of pushing design as a research area, and getting people sort of enthusiastic about supporting it. So anyway, so this is one qualifier. The other one that has to do with the funding, again, it's the same issue that we couldn't really see how to separate design from innovation in the funding side. And so this is a long answer to George's question about how we separate. And Anabel was right. We could not really separate it because of the nature of the sort of classification that we did. My sense is that most of it was geared towards early stage innovation, more so than later stage implementation. I apologize for the long answer, but I want to give some context. Thank you.
Thank you, Panos. And there will be more questions to you. And one reflection from myself is that it's interesting now how we talk about, we don't really talk about real collaborative work. We are many times talking about research or studies on what happens, but we have to probably think of doing this together to get a real learning between us and learning on both sides, so to say, because we are all very far away from the Sustainable Development Goals. So continue with that. Santosh has posed a question also to the team from University of Michigan. How can the collaboration, exactly what we talked about, between African and non-African researchers be enhanced? Has Design Society any plans to organize design conferences in Africa? That's a good question for Design Society. And I will just fill in, I've spent many years doing collaborative work together with African. They were not very used of using the term design for what they do, more on development or innovation, but in Design Society, we what they do many times is really about design and design education. So the Panos, maybe you were the one to answer that
right.
one also.
Not as author, but maybe as past president of the Design Society. So this
Right,
yeah.
right. You have
So
many roles.
this Africa Design Initiative was one of the things sort of I pushed myself in my last year of service as president, and that's how we got connected with Margareta. What's happening in Africa in terms of research, design research, is that, as Margareta said, you have the more traditional engineering researchers who are trained in things like mechanics, but they realize the design is really important, so they kind of try to shift. But just like it was certainly in the U.S., the past decades, design only very recently became a bona fide area of research. Recently, let's say 20 years. So that's the one group, as very traditional and rigorous. At the other end, you have sort of the business-oriented community that sees innovation, entrepreneurship, and design is like, the Apple design is, creating products that make money, right? And so you have these two extremes, but they both don't see design exactly the way we do. So what we are hoping, and this is the discussion today is a good example, is to sort of get the acknowledgement and the recognition that design as a bona fide research topic is very influential can be very influential when you study sustainable development. And George's paper was a very good example of how on the one side, you look at the ethnographic analysis, you try to understand what the people really need, but in a rigorous way, right? As we do in qualitative analysis. And then on the other side, you have the more traditional quantitative engineering analysis, and you try to mix the two together to have a much more rigorous result than the usual way, which is the engineers. Somebody tells the engineers, this is your goal, and then they just work on it. And the goal may be wrong for the technology. So, and then the final thing for Santos, yes, actually, we had this conversation starting since last year when we had the workshop in Delft for the Africa design, and we realized that several of our speakers from Africa who wanted to come couldn't come because couldn't get visas. Apparently, it's very difficult to get a visa, and this was pre-COVID, to get a visa from many African countries to get into the Netherlands, because the Netherlands had basically discontinued all their embassies in most of the African countries for cost cutting. So people from Kenya would have to go to Johannesburg to get a visa, things like that. So we said, okay, we need to think about creating some other opportunities. And there is some significant discussions, particularly following this event, of how we might become more inclusive by having online conferences, at least as an initial step during COVID and maybe soon after, so that we can get more people in Africa and other parts of the world to participate in what might be a difficult and expensive event. Hopefully, once we're done with COVID, we would have the opportunity to actually organize design conferences in Africa. And so I believe that's the desire of the current management of the Design Society. So thank
you. Right. Thank you, Panos. I do agree on everything you say, because this part we have worked quite a lot together. Interesting was, just as an information, yesterday we had this online workshop, which was great, quite a technical challenge, but we got participants from 8 different African countries into the breakout sessions and discussions. So it really shows the opportunity and possibility, and also that the Design Society have been very generous to these people that have not only visa problems but also economical problems to pay fee. So there must be to do this, to come together in a decent way, we have to use other quite different types of collaboration. Claudia had an interesting question referring to this. Is the research in and for Africa judged criteria of novelty and impact than research aimed at the West? Just some thoughts from myself first. It's interesting because we think that we have the right criteria. To collaborate to FAIR is really to try to understand what is counted by the society and the context where those colleagues of ours work. So maybe we have to be a little humble, because there might be some changes with us also. Anyone else who want to respond this question on criteria for research?
So,
Panos, I know you will, but is there someone else? You're absolutely welcome, Panos.
well, I wasn't sure what Claudia meant by judge. Judge by whom? I mean, are you talking about the research community? I guess Claudia cannot talk because she needs to ask permission. Maybe we should.
No,
Funders.
That's right. Funders. Okay.
I don't know, frankly.
Well, I would think.
My guess is yes, because
No, please, Panos.
I assume from the study that we did, it looks like the criteria are geared towards specific what are perceived as African needs. So if these needs are different than, let's say, in a developed country, like Margareta said, there will be difference in funding. But again, like Margareta said, this may be something that is changing also in the sort of the north or the more developed countries, particularly as it comes to sustainability.
Right.
And the paper, what Minette's paper, I think is a good example. I wonder if Minette has something to say, because it did sort of look at the different practices.
Yeah. So why don't you put a question, Minette? But please, you have the right to talk. So please. We are.
Thank you.
You could.
Yeah. No, I just think when I initially saw all the articles being published, I thought it was very interesting that I was the only delegate that was actually from South Africa, or from the African continent, talking about the specific topic. But I also agree with Article 4 that the research being done on the African content in the context of Africa is dismal. And I also think that when outside researchers come to Africa to research the problems which live here, there's such a big difference in what they expect and what they find that sometimes that gets mixed up in translation. Just like I spoke in my article about South Africa is seen as one of the countries with the worst recycling systems, but it has been proved that our mechanical recycling is actually much higher than most European countries. And I think a lot of that goes with the fact that so much plastic were exported to China up until 2018. So I think it's very important that you actually look at geographical location and the social needs of the area when you do research on it. Because in different Africa countries, the needs are so different. So some countries, they have famine. Some countries, don't have access to water. But when you consider all the social aspects before researching where most of their energy problems lies, then you might see what the actual problem is through looking at the entire system around the problem that you are trying to research.
Thank you, Minette. And as you also said in the chat, there are huge differences between different countries in the African continent, especially between South Africa and the other countries there. So what I think we sometimes have done, and probably some of us in the design society, is that we define the problem, and maybe that's the wrong way. To understand what challenges should be defined by the ones that really see the challenges, or together, of course. We have a question again from Santosh concerning Minette's presentation. Do plastic packaging designers consider context-specific recycling or other life cycle considerations in their design processes? Are these designers from South Africa or from the Western countries? Good. Relates to what we talked about. So, Minette, you have the word.
As being a plastic designer myself, there is a bit of a problem currently in South Africa because there's a big difference between environmental needs, social needs, and environmental needs. So in South Africa, bottles are currently being designed in order to meet profitable margins. So it is so expensive for companies to actually put recycling properties or use recycled PET in their designs, that they just decide it's not profitable to do so. So from a designer South Africa, it's very hard to design products which are actually viable throughout financial, social, and environmental needs, as it's all run by profit at the moment.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Those are interesting responses. Panos, you're asking Georgia, what crops are you looking at for drop irrigation? Is the energy requirements a major factor in the type of irrigation?
Yeah, thank you.
Georgia?
So the way I outlined it in the paper, it's, I believe we're delivering 6.5 millimeters of water a day. And that comes from sort of an average of typical vegetable crops in East Africa. So tomatoes, onions, cabbages. We did interview some farmers who were using drip irrigation with maize, but a lot of times that's not as recommended because maize grows really well with rain-fed irrigation. And rain-fed, you don't have any energy needed from the farmer input. So we are focusing more on like vegetable crops in that sense. In terms of energy requirements, yes, that is a major factor. You're moving such a large volume of water in every day to irrigate a sizable field that takes a lot of energy and a lot of power if you're doing solar. That comes in two ways. So the energy, the power needed is a function of the flow rate, which is ultimately a function of the volume of water you need to move, as well as the pressure. So that can come in from the water that you're lifting. So if you have a deep bore well or something, as well as the irrigation equipment itself, they all have different activation pressures. So in the paper, we were comparing impact sprinklers, which have a really high activation pressure compared to the low energy drip. And so, yeah, there is a big energy concern there. And you asked, do you have a microgrid set up? So,
yeah. So do you have
we're currently looking at prototyping a small system. I'd say it's more on the nanogrid size rather than microgrid, because we're still looking at fairly small farms that only need maximum maybe a kilowatt of power. Yeah, and we did find in a lot of cases that farmers were really interested in powering other things like TVs, charging cell phones, small household appliances. So that is more than just a user need. It's really like a value proposition that we would be offering with this type of product and help improve lifestyles.
One more related question. Water tends to be a scarce resource also. How much less water is needed when you use this irrigation system compared to earlier way of watering?
That is one of the large benefits of drip irrigation, is that for a given amount of crop, you can use less water. It's not always the case depending on how a user ends up using it. But we assumed that it's using 50% of the amount of water that sprinklers would need for the same amount of crop, because you're not watering in between, and you can really deliver the water right where it needs to be. Again, this also gets back to training. So in a lot of cases, we've noticed, or we've heard anecdotally, that farmers won't think that the plant's getting enough water because they only see it in a small area, so they water longer, and that reduces the amount of water efficiency that we would want. But it's used well. It's closer to 50%.
Okay. Thank you. So Panos has the last question for Georgia. Anyone else are welcome also. Are you also doing some economic analysis?
Could you expand what you mean by economic analysis?
Right. So for example,
Would you
you know, there's a cost associated with setting up the irrigation system and maybe the microgrid or nanogrid. So the question is, if you do that, do you increase your yield and the benefit from the yield versus the income and the needs for, you know, for setting up the system in the first place?
Yeah, I am. And so that's maybe a more recent development that I didn't include here, but I am trying to understand what your profits could be if you do use drip, and maybe you're able to expand your farm because you're using less water, and so it can go further. So I'm trying to incorporate, yeah, the cost that the farmer would see from the equipment, as well as the profits that they might see by using that equipment. And then also thinking more about a payment plan, because the pay-as-you-go plans are pretty popular for equipment. At least in Kenya they are. And so trying to understand what that cost would look like and if it's feasible for a company to supply that as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Georgia and Panos. Anyone else in our guests in this session want to pose some questions to our speakers? I waited a few seconds for someone. Pay as you go is a great option. Thank you, Minette. Yeah. I could ask a question to Minette. So what would your elevator pitch be to advise to the world about usage of plastics? Would the advice be different between the South African or other African countries compared to the West, to US and Europe?
Well, so,
I
think the same within the South African context, we as South Africans like to believe that we can compete in certain markets with Western countries, and plastics is one of those areas. Because I think when you look at Africa, there's so many smaller problems and smaller issues that plastics as being a good, big, sustainable product is not really, they don't really think about that, because for them, plastics, not necessarily, I'm talking about the extreme poverty-stricken areas, the means of getting clean water is through using plastic bottles. So they don't care how much they don't care what type of plastic is used, as long as they get clean water at the lowest possible cost. So I think if you apply design principles like lightweighting plastics, creating user education through good labeling practices, and actually looking at each part of the system of a plastic bottle, from raw material extraction to production to transportation, use, and finally disposal, then those practices can be applied to any plastic design system across the world, because it will inevitably be, it will have to be socially viable in any location, economically viable and environmentally viable. And you will definitely have different social issues with regards to geographical location and profit issues, because some countries have.
I don't hear
That's
you
strange. Can you hear me now?
So how come? Sorry. Now I get you.
So I think it's important to apply these principles by looking at geographical location, because if you look at Europe, they are a much richer country. Their GDP is much higher than any. So it's also important to make sure that the product is viable in the location that it's placed. But I think sustainable principles can be applied, the same sustainable things can be applied all over the world. Yes. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone more? We don't see anyone coming in with question. What I think personally, you see, it's getting dark here in Stockholm already, so I had to go closer because we have this, darkness coming. A reflection from myself is that this 4 papers together and discussion is really learning occasion for all of us. And I think, at least I can talk for myself, and I'm sure some of you think the same, that we get more ideas on what we should continue to work on. There are so good reports. Some of the things you say, you get more curious. Is this really true or is it not? And the other ones with the rigorous studies makes us inspired, I would say. So I would hope, coming to Panos again, I would hope that we, as at least as old fellow members of Design Society, would continue to open up more work also related to Design Society and Design 2020. Any more
I just
comments on
posted
that?
a note.
Oh, you did? We hope to have, yes, that's absolutely right. We hope that this conference will be at least partly real-time meeting, and we will see. But there is a conference, and the deadline for delivering papers is already the 2nd of December. But I'm sure that many of you have something on your desk that you could send, so it could be enlarge this area.
Yeah.
That would
So
be
if I
really,
may,
really nice.
Margareta.
So
the ISED
yeah,
conference, ISED 21, will be in August in Gothenburg, Sweden. But the most recent sort of decisions are that it will be probably hybrid, if not just online, depending on the COVID situation, but for sure hybrid. Apart from having papers in a special session like this one, we're also hoping to organize a workshop like we did in Delft, and hopefully Margareta and her colleagues will be involved. But also any of you, please get in touch with us. As Margareta said, we'd like to, newer generation of researchers involved, and push this agenda to the degree you like. So.
Right. So you're most welcome, and we will not give up on this. With that, I think we have to move ourselves to some social space, as Dorian says it. I would like to thank you all, of course, the presenters, and for your good work. And again, of course, congratulate Georgia and the team of yours for this. You'll get a paper on that one after the conference. So to all of you in the group, and it was very interesting. And thank you so much. And our friends that we didn't see now, we also thankful. And Robert,
thank you.
Always help us with
Enjoy.
moderation.
Bye.
Thank you, Margareta.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Hi.